Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing great. Now, I would like to welcome the next session, the next panel on bringing clinical trials into the new age with blockchain from PharmaLedger. We've been working with PharmaLedger since early last year. Very exciting pharma and health consortium. I'm now going to give the word to Disa. She's the moderator of this panel. Welcome on board. Welcome on stage.
Victoria, and hello everyone. Yes, my name is Disa Choun, and I'll be your chair for the next hour. So today we have a very exciting topic, as Victoria mentioned. We will be discussing on PharmaLedger bringing clinical trials into the new age with blockchain. So a brief introduction about me. I'm the head of integrated clinical and operational analytics at Janssen, a Johnson & Johnson company. And I have over 15 years of experience working in the pharmaceutical industry, involved in digital transformation strategies, and also have led many various teams in the research and development area. And prior to joining Pharma, I was a co-founder for an IT company, and I have been a member of PharmaLedger since the beginning. So I have been co-leading some of the use cases, but also I'm also been co-leading the Fuse blockchain workgroup. And the interesting part is that some of the use cases have been shared across. So that's great to see that collaboration between PharmaLedger and other consortiums. So today we'll be discussing that. And I'm joined by a panel of experts, and they're also my peers working in this exciting project. So first of all, we have Steven Leiper, who is the CEO of Onorach Clinical, a clinical research company managing clinical trials worldwide for clients and conducting clinical research mainly in phase 1 to 4 and medical devices. And Steven began his career over 40 years ago in sales of diagnostic products to clinical labs. And he later developed his skills in identifying commercially available molecular products and tools to assist academics in cutting-edge clinical research and work for some of the largest molecular research companies. So Steven set up Onorach back in 2009 and has a long-standing interest in digital data and improving clinical trial process. He's also a qualified histologist, graduating from the University of Sydney, and he's a member of the Royal Society of Medicine. Welcome, Steven. We also have Baldwin who earned his PhD in biochemistry and postdoc training in oncology. He's a digital expert in clinical development and operations, clinical of excellence, or center of excellence, digital labs at Ingelheim. So at BI, he's part of the digital labs team within the Center of Excellence for Digital Transformation in Clinical Development and Operations. Prior to this, Baldwin was part of the clinical operations leadership team at BI Canada, where he was responsible for assessments of new clinical trials in Canada and also led a diverse team of clinical leaders and managers. Baldwin led a pilot project to explore the conduct of clinical trials on blockchain with collaboration between BI and IBM. And currently, he serves as the industry co-lead on the pharma use case e-consent. Next, we have Francesco Spoto. Francesco has a biomedical engineering degree, and he's also an EMBA candidate in 2022. He is the Global Clinical Supply Project Manager at Novartis and co-lead of the clinical supply chain use case at PharmaLedger. And Francesco is a senior life science professional with broad experience in consulting and pharmaceutical companies. And he has been managing several innovation initiatives across Europe, spanning from pharma R&D, IT, and quality. And he's also an early adopter of private blockchains. And last but not least, we have Kristina Livitckaia. She is an R&D project manager and a postdoc, has a postdoc researcher or does a postdoc research working at Information Technology Institute Center for Research and Technology, Hellas. In other words, CERT ITI. So Kristina earned her PhD from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly, and has an MS in telemedicine and health and e-health, also Master of Science in Economics. And she has experience working in academia, the industry, and R&D facility in several European countries for the past 8 years, from project and product management to execution of scientific work and running and mentoring startup companies. So again, welcome everyone. And it's again, happy to have you all here. Before we start with this discussion and the panel discussion to share the experiences with PharmaLedger, we thought it would be important to dive into, what is PharmaLedger and what we're trying to bring here. So first of all, PharmaLedger, for those who are not familiar, is part of the Innovative Medicines Initiative. It's a consortium of 29 partners. So it's composed of pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, universities, patient organizations, and also technology companies. And we are building a scalable and sustainable blockchain-based platform. So validated through 8 use cases in 3 main domain areas, which are in clinical trials, health data, and also supply chain. And this is partly funded by EU and also pharmaceutical companies with a total of 22 million euros. And it's a 3-year project. And currently we are in year 2. So with this said, I will hand over now to Stephen, who will give you a high-level overview of the use cases. So Stephen.
Thank you, Disa. So as Disa said, what we've done with the project is we've focused in on a number of use cases that can benefit from the use of blockchain in digital health. And as you can see from the screen here, there are 8 use cases, some of which fall outside of the scope of clinical trials, such as anti-counterfeiting. But I wanted to talk particularly about how not just the individual use cases are being developed, but how, as a clinical research organization, we see the big benefit of this is that by linking the individual use cases with some of the leads that you will meet on the panel in a few minutes, by linking all of those in the process of clinical trials, this creates a very powerful set of tools that we can use, which dramatically transforms the whole clinical trial process. So key to this is a use case on clinical trial recruitment, which is a very different way of approaching how we might engage with patients and participants in clinical trials. There is the e-consent use case, which goes beyond the traditional formal requirement of consent for a clinical trial and gives patients control over post-use of things like specimens and stuff like that after a clinical trial. And then there's the clinical supply use case, which again kind of started with a blank sheet of paper, and we looked at how we might do things very different in terms of supplying the components that are required to conduct the clinical trial, specifically the drugs, but also some of the other components that are important in a clinical trial. And then even if we look outside of the classical sort of clinical trial components of PharmaLedger, we look at something like e-leaflet, which is originally the idea behind that is to replace the leaflets that you get in a packet of medicine. Whenever you open a pack of medicine, you have something that tells you about, how to use it and everything like that. But this is actually, because it's an app that sits on a mobile device, it's actually a very powerful way of engaging with patients in a clinical trial to give them the instructions that they need for the investigative product on the clinical trial, and because it's an app, it's a two-way thing. So it's a great tool for us to conduct pharmacovigilance in terms of ensuring patient safety. And it can even be used as patient-reported outcomes. So there can be some feedback from the patient in terms of what's happening with the drug. And then there is the medical device IoT use case, which is, as it says there, this is the only one that specifically focuses on medical devices. But again, it takes advantage of the power of not just blockchain, but other things in order to gather real-time data in clinical trials. And when we combine all of those components, then that creates something that is extremely powerful in terms of transforming how we conduct clinical trials at the moment, that we believe will be of benefit to not just sponsors, but to patients in being involved in clinical trials as well. And I think the first of those that we're going to talk about today is the e-consent use case. So now I will hand over to Baldwin, who will talk to you about that.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Disa. So as Stephen mentioned, he talked about the 4 use cases that we're looking at in PharmaLedger around healthcare clinical trials. And really early on within PharmaLedger, it was recognized that a key enabler of a lot of these processes, especially around healthcare, is the consenting element. So the e-consent use case is a critical piece in all of this, because as we see in our environment right now, especially around the change in our digital world, there's a larger emphasis on customer engagement, customer ownership of their data. So we believe that it's really important to be able to engage our customers or the people who are actually in the trial in a very direct way. And so why are we looking at blockchain in clinical trials? And for those who may be familiar with that industry and how clinical trials are conducted, they're very manual right now. They can be complex with different systems that don't necessarily interact. So there are systems, processes that we've built in to address some of the issues that we see, such as non-compliances, consistency of data, and things like that. So things like manual checks and duplication of and transcribing of data from one system to another. And we believe that blockchain can help us with that by creating this central ledger of things that happen within the clinical trial environment. And the other piece is that it can increase the level of transparency and data integrity within all the stakeholders in the clinical trial, as you can see in the diagram on the left. And so if you look at some of the annual reports from health agencies such as FDA and EMA, some of the most common inspection findings, greater than 50%, really speak to inadequate processes to ensure quality, accuracy, and completeness of data. And then 5 to 10% of the findings are related to non-compliance with the protocol, and 2 to 7% are related to ICF or informed consent issues. So we believe that blockchain can really help to address that by reducing and reducing the non-compliances and ensuring that quality. And so the e-consent use case is really not specifically about the consenting per se, but it's really around the management of a clinical trial and how you conduct it. And so what you can see here is it's actually because e-consent or consenting is an enabling piece. What we've moved forward with is combining some of the use cases. So you'll see here that we're talking about e-consent and how the implications of that consent to data collection through a device such as an IoT, and what can happen with the data that's collected afterwards. So the personalized medicine use case. So the vision here is to provide a digital solution for clinical trial conduct by leveraging the status of the informed consent on blockchain. And by doing that, you can enable automation of processes like data collection, appropriate visits that should be done, and the use of that data. And so what does this mean to the key stakeholders? So I've shown here 3 of them. The most important one is the trial subjects. So this will hopefully increase their visibility to what's happening in the clinical trial and allow them to have some ownership and be a partner in the process of a clinical trial. So I think this is a really, really important piece moving forward in clinical trials. And for clinical sites, it has the potential to increase efficiency and speed. Clinical sites would have the confidence that what's being done, the material that they're being used, is going to be what it should be. And then from a sponsor perspective, we see the value of speed. So ensuring data quality and compliance. And the automation process can replace some of the manual processes that we have now in clinical trials. And on top of that, we see a benefit in being able to access data that we don't necessarily have access to now through this permissioning process. So essentially, this is what we're trying to work towards within PharmaLedger with these 3 use cases, and we hope to have a pilot by the end of the year.
Great. Thank you so much, Baldwin, for the overview. So with that said, and thank you as well, Stephen. So as next, we will now go into some of the questions for the panel. And one of the first questions we have is regarding, what is the value for pharmaceutical or industries to come together in this project? And that's something we've been asked frequently. So I will hand over to Francesco, if you can start.
Yeah, sure, Disa. And hello, everyone, and hello to the audience. Very glad to be here. As co-lead of one of the use cases that is looking at improving and enhancing the way we run clinical trials, and specifically the way we manage clinical supplies, I think the major benefit of joining a consortium is possibly twofold. On one end, you have a sharing of risks and costs, and that's very important when you do the discovery phase of your journey, where you really come together. You are not working with a super mature technology. You're working on blockchain that is coming to fruition, but you still don't have a lot of standards that are accepted across the board. So you have still to explore, and that can be lengthy and expensive. That's definitely one element. But the second element is really to drive adoption from the very beginning through collaboration. So making sure that everybody has a common understanding, a common way of calling things, and collaborate towards a common objective that may not be the objective of a single actor or pharma sponsor, but can be the objective for the industry. So in our use case, what we gave ourselves as an imperative is provide value to every single actor that we involve, from the pharma manufacturer down to patient clinical sites and regulators. So we want to give everyone the incentives of adopting a one-stop shop solution to manage clinical supply across the industry.
Francesco. Kristina, anything to add to Francesco?
Yes, hello everyone. Of course, always something to add. So actually, I wanted to pick up the thought and what started by Stephen, the flow and the synergies of the use cases. I think it's important. So I'm also co-leading the clinical supply use case. And together we have a panel of the co-leads of different use cases that somehow is mentioned related to the clinical trials. And this is actually highly important because when we consider the clinical trial, it's a very complex process that involving many sub-processes, its own stakeholders, involving the patient on different levels, granularity with different objectives, and how the patient involved in generally. So I think that one of the approaches that we follow, first of all, to start with, is we're trying to split this whole process in the use cases, and then going deeper to investigate and study the scenarios under each of the use cases. For example, what mentioned by Francesco was a fantastic point, meaning that we try to bring value to all stakeholders involved. And in order to do so, we need to investigate not only the use cases, but all the possible scenarios that might appear within the specific use case. And those are very unique to different stakeholders. So, for example, speaking of the clinical supply chain, which we have the sponsors, we have couriers, we have clinical sites, all are looking for the utilization, let's say, of the blockchain solution from a slightly different angle, because they're looking for the support and optimization of their processes that are very unique. Of course, it starts all with a sponsor, indeed. Let's say as a controlling point of everything is on track. However, when we talk about utilizations of systems, they should bring value. Otherwise, they will not be used. And actually, speaking a little bit of our experience while the development, we can say that taking care of all the requirements from the stakeholders, that's one of the key aspects to be handled. So that's something that I don't know if this can be used as a recommendation, though. So we start with a baby steps, splitting, and then investigating all the scenarios, and then going down to all stakeholders.
Kristina, yes, you have a valid point. I mean, and also Francesco, I think having a consortium like this that we're able to kind of like collaborate and partner is so critical, because we're also sharing lessons learned as well. Baldwin and Stephen, anything that you'd like to add to this?
Stephen, go ahead,
yeah.
Stephen.
Yeah. So from our position as a clinical research organization, it's actually quite interesting to see the collaboration of all of these pharma organizations who essentially have independent agendas in terms of what they want to do. But it's been really useful to identify common challenges and to identify the key things that we think will be quite will be of most benefit from having adopted blockchain ledger technology. And so I think that's a really powerful aspect of all of the pharma companies coming together with this. From our point of view, we see that there's a lot of common discussion about the vision of what we're trying to do. We started with a much larger set of use cases, and we honed those down to the point where we had the 8 that we thought were going to benefit most from blockchain ledger technology, and also the ones that were common as challenges within the pharma companies.
And that's for me, I think blockchain has the potential to be a transformative technology in our entire industry, because of the decentralized nature of blockchain. I think it's also really important to have all the key stakeholders in the industry be a part of this transformational change. So the value is really to have all the key stakeholders, and it's not just pharma, it's patient groups, it's hospitals, it's it could even be regulatory bodies, every touch point that's in healthcare. It's really important to have their element and their contribution to setting up what the future of healthcare can look like. And the other piece of the blockchain, as I sort of spoke about, is the power to connect and automate. And because we have so many systems between the different stakeholders, the value of having the different members in PharmaLedger really helps to standardize what that's going to look like in the future.
All right, Baldwin and Stephen, I like what you mentioned about, having this solution basically focusing on what values they bring to the different stakeholders. And it's so important that, in this consortium, we're bringing the right people, the right, I would say stakeholders, because it's from patients, not just on the pharma side or or the clinical researcher side, the scientists or the technologies, but it's also building what the future would look like you mentioned about something transformational like this type of solution that provides that transparency in terms of how we conduct clinical trials, but also that extra security level that blockchain provides, and potentially basically helping patients in this healthcare ecosystem that you were mentioning, Baldwin. So I do agree. This is very again, this project for me, it's a very interesting in the sense of there's so many great collaboration that's happening across the board, and the openness, because usually, like Stephen, you mentioned, usually there's not that type of collaboration, but we see this, and it's thanks to this type of technology where everyone comes together and think about, okay, these are the same issues that we have in the different companies, regardless. This is great. So thank you. So my next question is regarding the adoption and the experience. And of course, one of the questions that we get asked all the time is, is PharmaLedger going to do that? And, are we going to, when is the earliest that we can basically implement PharmaLedger in our companies? So I just first of all want to touch on, what's your experience so far? Because I know some of you have done proof of concept. I mean, you can just share your experience on that and how potentially that could lead to adoption, and how potentially this could support PharmaLedger going forward. I'll hand over first to Baldwin. May you want to tell us a little bit more about your e-consent project?
Yes, thanks, Disa. I was just having a bit of a coughing fit. Excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. So yeah, we've had some experience at BI with testing out blockchain in clinical trials. We did a pilot coming out of Canada in collaboration with IBM about 2 or 3 years ago. And mainly it's to test the the value that it can bring to reducing non-compliances, reducing costs, and also very importantly, user engagement. And out of that study, we had about 12 patients participate in the blockchain element as a substudy in a clinical trial. And we also had monitors monitor the data through the blockchain platform that we had designed. And we saw the potential for time and cost reduction. And we also had really amazing feedback from the end users, specifically the patients and the clinical sites. The patients really felt that they were involved. They could see what was coming up next in terms of the clinical trials and what was expected of them for the next visit that they had to come in for. So I thought that was a really key and important first step for us as a company to look at blockchain, and I hope that had sparked additional work in this industry on looking at blockchain. When we started it in 2018, I don't think there was a lot of visibility on blockchain, but since that time, there's been so much done through Fuse, through PharmaLedger, and a lot of the different pharma companies have started to look at blockchain as a viable next step. But I think there's also activity around the clinical trial supply space, and recently BI has put out a press release on using blockchain for anti-counterfeiting. So that's something that we're working on as well.
Great, thank you, Baldwin. In terms of based on this pilot, any next projects that you are able to share or adoption, if that's the case? Yeah,
so my project within BI sort of led me to PharmaLedger, so that's why I'm part of the e-consent use case here. So hopefully, out of the work that we're doing right now at PharmaLedger, that will bring us to the next step to broadening what we hope to do. So as I described in our use case, we're sort of doing the same thing, looking at using blockchain in the clinical trial setting, managing clinical trial conduct, but now we're expanding it to look at collection of data and secondary use of data, which we didn't do in our pilot. So it's been an evolution of an extension of what we've been doing within BI.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Kristina, I know you mentioned as well in the past about some of the proof of concept, and maybe you can also share a little bit more information on the projects.
Yes, of course. Well, actually, I wanted to start to support the discussion on the adoption, if possible, with some study results that we got. So as SERT, we are part of the European Blockchain Observatory and Forum, supported by the European Commission. And this is our time to produce the healthcare and COVID report. And of course, this massively include the cases and the use cases of the pharmaceutical industry, of course, starting with the clinical and general supply chain. So interesting point from this report, because we run some surveys targeting the experts who are working in one or another way with blockchain in healthcare. And we tried to investigate rather the people their professionals believe that, the adoption is feasible within the following 5 to 10 years. And the majority, I mean, it's nearly 80%, responded to yes. And that actually interesting point of the discussion on its own, but I wanted to lead to those 20% who said no, and then we further tried to investigate what are the blocking points. So today, why I try to touch this subject upon, because we discuss generally the proof of concepts, and many companies in the big pharma, the SMEs, research institutes, they're trying their best towards proof of concepts, are trying to, and this is absolutely normal stage or process, because we're trying to discover what within the blockchain, what technologies, what applications, what kind of utilization will work for each specific use case, because it's very unique. On its own, we cannot compare, let's say, clinical supply or e-consent, right? Those are completely different flows, but we could, of course, merge. So, and coming back to the investigation, what would be the blockers? I will operate with those that achieved more than 80% of the votes. So those are the policy considerations, which is, of course, always, I think the policy somehow could be considered as on one side a blocker, on the other side facilitator. It depends, of course. But what also brought my attention to is the adoption by end users, which is also might be linked to the fact that the stakeholders, potential stakeholders, might be not informed or aware of such solution. But one of the most popular answers, nearly 90-something% answered, selected this question answer, that was lack of knowledge or training. And I wanted to share this with the audience, because I think that even though we live and we experience this very innovative stream of exploring the technology, still imagine that 90% of professionals working in this domain exactly believe that the lack of knowledge train that blocks the adoption. So I don't know if I answered the question. I think that it's important to move on, but I wanted to highlight the fact that it's also important maybe to understand and facilitate the educational learning processes, because in the blockchain we have many technology solutions, frameworks to be used, right? Because we say blockchain, but what does it mean back there? I mean, diving a little bit deeper. So yeah, I think that would be a point to share concerning the adoption.
Kristina, you bring a very good point, because I mean, that's one thing that some of the other concerns that I mentioned earlier, like Fuse, the first point that we wanted to do was create awareness, because we realized that a lot of decision makers, yes, they're more like senior level. They might not know the details of the technologies and the advancements in this case, like this type of like emergent technology. So it's almost down to people like experts in our area where be able to inform and then bring awareness. And I think through this PharmaLedger, of course, that's what we're trying to do. I mean, I think the PharmaLedger project as a whole, we have a work stream who's basically creating all these different type of materials that we can surface as well through the organization and within the organization to inform, what are the potential use cases, because what we need to show is the value at the end. And I know a lot of times we get the question about what's the return on investment. Well, it's actually hard to quantify at this stage, but we do see all the different benefits as we have described earlier, and all of you have described earlier. So I think yes, it's a very important point. And Kristina, thank you for sharing that the first draft of the report or the outcome of that report with us, because yes, you know, awareness training, that comes first, and basically having that digital literacy, I guess, in other words. Yes. So Francesco and Steven, anything to add in terms of like adoption and also any experiences that you would like to share in POCs or pilots?
You want to give a start, Stephen, or should I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, from our point of view, yeah, I think, as has been mentioned, you know, there are some challenges at the moment in terms of sort of the knowledge base of what the potential is with blockchain. But I think there is an underlying commitment within organizations like the NHS, by the European Medicines Agency and the FDA. Organizations do recognize that technology, and particularly blockchain ledger technology, is something that will be of value in terms of improving process and improving how we work to regulatory processes and things like that. So there is an underlying understanding, but I think we need to probably improve on that message as much as we can. Obviously, there's a lot of interest here in this particular conference, and if we can sort of use that as a chance to pass the message on, I think that would be great.
Yeah, that's a great point, Stephen. I think adding on the adoption and proof of concept stage, we used to say that everything works on PowerPoint, right? So we saw the beautiful slide by Baldwin, and everything is so clean and neat. Unfortunately, reality, as Kristina was mentioning, it's slightly more complicated. So you really have to be a great, diverse team of people with technological, governance, business, organizational understanding and skills to make it happen. And that's, again, why we decided to start and keep on working on a consortium style or consortium-based approach. The main learning from the POCs that we ran in the past at Novartis, I think, is more a conceptual approach. Blockchain, before the big crash of cryptocurrency, the end of 2017, it was seen mostly as a disruptive force. And you know, every time you want to disrupt something or someone, you encounter a lot of resistance, right? So the famous middleman doesn't want to get cut out of the project. So I think the learning there was really a little bit more philosophical. We are not in the centralized finance here. We are not trying to remove with force a central authority, but we are trying to create a better way for us to engage with our partners, and finally, ultimately, benefiting our patients. So we can do it with a pre-competitive way of collaborating instead of competing. And that's the main learning. So we use blockchain not to disrupt the industry, not disrupt our partners and potentially external vendors, but to integrate them, to bring them to a common standard, to a common understanding, and to potentially bring down costs and timelines to introduce new product to the market and save lives. So I think the kind of focus completely shifted from the one that we had 3 or 4 years ago.
Yes, and thank you, Francesco. You bring a good point, because you know it's removing that middleman, right? So by removing that, you have a more direct, you know, maybe interaction with the different stakeholders, and it's good that you touch on the patients, because at the end, you know, what we do here is actually to benefit, you know, the patients, and that leads me to the next question. You know, what is the value for the patients in the clinical trials? And you know, especially when we're looking at, you know, blockchain and the use cases, how we're designing it. If I can hand over first to Steven.
Yeah, so I think the main benefit to patients is that there's an element of truth, trust, and transparency, as I like to say about this, because by having an immutable record of what is going on with every step of the process, we can have that level of trust that these new use cases that we're trying to introduce are going to be secure and are going to be trustworthy in terms of what we do with the data. And there's transparency because there's vision from the patient side, because we are quite deliberately designing the use cases hand in hand with patient representative groups and things like that, to ensure that patients get to the visibility that they want from these use cases. So I think that's the real strength. And in fact, I was at a patient representative conference a couple of days ago, and that was exactly the message that came back to me, is that when I was talking about PharmaLedger, they were very keen to sort of engage and be involved, purely on the basis that they felt that this was something that would give them a different level of trust in health in general and in clinical trials specifically.
You, Steven, anyone has anything to add to Steven's?
I can extend on that. I'd like to sort of extend also on what Francesco had said. I totally agree with him. It's really about transforming the way we do things. If the industry is also moving into and looking at decentralized clinical trials, and unfortunately with the pandemic, more and more of our clinical trial processes have moved away from the clinic and more to remote interactions. And with that, it facilitates the patient. It really brings that piece home to them. But the piece that's missing is the trust. And I think blockchain can help with that, can really enable that empowerment that Stephen spoke about, where patients can be a partner in the process. They can see what's going on and what is expected of them. And then if you think about some of the other use cases that we're working on, like anti-counterfeiting, blockchain can help bring confidence to the patient that whatever medication that they're taking is the actual medication that they're supposed to be taking. So I see a true benefit for all the stakeholders, specifically the patients, because patients are the focus of what we do in healthcare.
Yes, great. Thank you. Thank you, Baldwin. Francesco and Kristina, a few final words before we dive into some of the questions in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, let me echo what we just said together. I mean, at the end, we are not doing it for any external motivation. The reason is bring value to everyone, and that's our focus, and the patient is the ultimate goal. So if we can simplify a patient that is already in a potential difficult condition, that is taking a clinical product, so it will not have so much information about that. So it's not a commercial product. At least we have to give the guarantee that they can trust the process. And that's the reason why we are trying to unify, standardize, and improve the process as much as possible, making it homogeneous across the companies, right? So potentially in the future, you will have the same interface and same modality of onboarding a trial in BI and in Novartis. And that's going to be great for the patient, because you don't have to go through the learning process every time you onboard a new trial. Or the same can be said for a clinical site. So you can operate in the same modality with all of us. And that drastically reduces the administrative effort that a clinician or a physician can have in managing the trial rather than managing or supporting the patient. I mean, I think this is the real value on top of everything that we can do on the pharma sponsors end.
Yeah, and maybe to add to that as well, Francesco, if we're looking at more remote clinical trials, more remote interactions, I can really see value in health equity, accessing those patients that don't necessarily have access to clinics because of where they are or whatever situation that they're in. So I really see, again, great value for patients from that perspective.
Yeah, we got a great presentation internally on diversity on clinical trials, and definitely blockchain can help us out, because we can reach more remote location with the same level of service and trust. So that's going to be great.
Yep.
I may add some couple of words from my side. I think that what my colleagues are saying is that generally the blockchain and the application in the industry, in the clinical trials, self-evident. Okay, there are many prospects and opportunities and values, but for the patient, I think that the public right now becomes more aware of data, of privacy, many concerns or matters related to that. And I think with blockchain, the solutions would be more, let's say, transparent, that the patient could rely more on some solutions that they're using to be more confident about the flow and the data. So when it comes to the clinical trials, we talk about the data, and this has many questions around the data ownership. So I think the blockchain and such solutions would actually facilitate this. And this is of high value because we are all, on some extent, patients. I believe all of us use the medical services, we want it or not. So I think it's highly important as we're working for the solutions for ourselves as well.
Again, well said, Kristina, and that's great final words on this topic. Thank you, everyone. So now we're going to jump into some of the questions that we have in chat, and we have quite a few. So first of all, let me start with Pedro Silva. Pedro says he would like to learn more about the initiative and the plans in the health data track. So I wonder whether Baldwin, Kristina, Stephen, can you speak on this?
I mean, the basic suggestion I can give is go to pharmaledger.eu, and then you will find all the resources and contacts. So that's another kind of focus. We focus mostly on clinical trials today. So I think it would be better if Pedro reach out our colleagues in the L data space.
Francesco, yes, and there's also a general email, so you can also post questions there to us. Thank you. So Robin Clemens, which blockchain framework do you use and who operates the nodes?
That probably would be me here. Okay, so we are using OpenDSU framework. And the matter of the blockchain, it's the selection of the blockchain and then running the nodes is a unique decision of each use case. So we develop all the solutions based on the OpenDSU. So it's a very strong off-chain solution. And then on top of it, we put, let's say, add the blockchain, the specific technology, again, to be selected by the use case based on the requirements of use case, because they are very unique, as we discussed. Of course, we support highly reusability within the consortium. So once someone explored and something is working, okay, we try to see how that could be reused in another use case, if of course possible. And again, the nodes, for example, we have API use case, and the nodes would be run by the pharmaceutical companies, because those are the sponsors or main stakeholders, the core. So that's all depends on the use case, I believe.
Okay, thank you, Kristina. And DSU, for those who don't know what that stands for, is Data Storage Unit. Okay, so, yes, thank you.
Kristina, maybe I can add to what Kristina was saying. The whole architecture of the blockchain network in PharmaLedger is meant to be blockchain agnostic, so the DSU will allow for that.
Yes, thank you. So next question also from Robin, will the data of the clinical trials be published? I guess I can take that. Not necessarily, I mean, I guess define what you mean by publish. I mean, usually we would just follow the the guidance for conducting clinical trials. So that would be the same regardless of what technology we would use. I hope that answers the question. Okay, the next one. Is the work of PharmaLedger public? Yes. And yes, that's been already shared. Robin, as mentioned, please go to pharmaledger.eu. Another question from Alejandro David, how to integrate all actors of the ecosystem, suppliers, medical centers, hospitals, retail stores?
That's an interesting one. Maybe I can try to address that.
Yes.
So we know that every single actor have different level of awareness, understanding, but also technological capacity. So if you compare like a big corp to a small clinical site or even a patient, of course, the awareness, understanding, and reaching not to mention the budget availability can be different. So we don't foresee a world where every single actor operates a node on the blockchain. It may be via a graphical user interface, a web application, or any other solution that enables data sharing. And of course, there will be few but enough nodes on the blockchain to guarantee that the network stays decentralized. So no, we will not ask any single patient to get a node spin up or spin off on the blockchain. That's a given. Very short answer to a very complex question.
I wanted actually to add with on this some couple of words. Actually, stay tuned for the updates from us. Actually, for that on the clinical supply chain use case. But though I also wanted to mention that starting from the requirements, I think we try to. It's a combo of the requirements and how we approach the stakeholders, understanding who are the stakeholders, and understanding deeply their flows, in order to ensure that what we are doing actually reflects the needs. Otherwise, that will not be just used. And the second point is that, as mentioned, we're using OpenDSUs, and we work really hardly on the organization of the data on the backend, the off-chain data. So this is actually partly, if you would see the architecture of the data, you would understand the question. Though I would recommend also answering the question about if the data is public. We have GitHub, where we published openly the progress of our work, though we don't reveal everything because a lot of details stay confidential within the project. Though some of the solutions, if you're learning, for example, the OpenDSU, you would understand and could be reused even. So that would be my answer.
Thank you, Kristina. Okay, so next
Disa,
question. Oh, yes,
Disa,
go ahead.
just quickly, Robin's question, I wasn't sure whether that was directed to me or PharmaLedger, but if it was related to me, because I talked about the pilot that we ran in BI, that is published. It's you can find it at Blockchain and Healthcare Today.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. All right, so the next question from Alison Doherty. What are your thoughts on the ease of communicating blockchain technology to the relevant stakeholders?
Can I start with that one? Yeah, so obviously part of the role of what we do in this consortium is to try to communicate the message on the role of blockchain and on the role of what we're doing here. As part of the deliverables for the project, we are creating a collaboration platform where we are engaging with stakeholder groups. So it's a bit different to a newsletter. It's going to be an area where you can sort of have like a community area to share thoughts and stories about what's happening both with PharmaLedger and for things that go beyond PharmaLedger but are related to what we're trying to achieve in the project. That's still in development, and you can access it via the PharmaLedger website. So basically, keep your eye out there to see what we're doing with that. I know at the moment we're working very closely with some patient representative groups to create a collaboration platform that's targeted at explaining what we're doing to patients.
Maybe I can add to that from our experience in our pilot. We found that when we started engaging the end users, like clinical sites, for example, we started talking about blockchain technology, they just didn't understand that. They couldn't relate to it. So we pivoted to talk about the value proposition for them to understand what the technology can bring to them, and that really helped them to at least be open to testing out the technology. And there's nothing that really, I guess, surpasses real life use and actually using the technology. And when we ran our pilot, some of the clinical sites, when they used it, really realized the power of what it can bring. And they even offered and suggested additional uses with this technology. So to me, that reinforced the approach that we presented the technology to the relevant stakeholders.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think while the underlying blockchain is important, the best way to get the message across is to talk about the real value that comes from what we're doing with the use cases.
Great. Thank you so much. And I know we have run out of time, and there's a couple more questions in the chat, and of course some also comments, very positive comments about the work that we're doing. Victoria, I'm not sure whether we will have time to answer those, or maybe we answer via the chat.
We have 2 minutes left, I believe.
Okay, great. So, okay, let me move on to Eric Storda. Don't you offering disrupt existing digital ID access solution in healthcare based on centralized databases?
I would say more integrate and disrupt, going back to my original point. We don't want to remove or disrupt any central database. We recognize that blockchain and standard databases have two different functions and different capabilities. I think they work better together. So the big load of information will stay in the NHS or National Health Service database. In general, blockchain may be helping with transactional data and with exchanging data across different stakeholders. I mean, the major benefit would be to have a clear privacy, a clear protection of data, and allowing the patient to really own their data. So potentially also I have a different incentive to share data with the rest of us.
Yes, and thank you, Francesco. I know we run out of time, and just the last question from Steve Berg, which is very relevant with what you just mentioned about access to data post-trial and who will be the owner of the patient data. And to your point, I mean, yes, the idea is that when we conduct clinical trials, I mean, yes, the pharma companies would have that information, but the idea is that we can pass back that data after the clinical trial is done and is published, pass that data back to the patient's electronic medical record. So that's the idea that we have, and it's been discussed, of course, within the PharmaLedger. So hopefully that will be something that we can develop in the future as an industry. So I know we run out of time. So Victoria, thank you. First of all, want to thank all of you for participating in this panel discussion, and to our panelists and for the great questions.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Disa.
Thank you
Thank
very
you so much to the 5 of you. Amazing panel discussion. And yeah, guys, as it was said, you can reach out to them either via their booth or the People's tab if you have more questions, or via their website. Thank you very much, guys. Let's continue with the next Pharma panel. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.